I listened to, but important in light of the murder of these innocent hostages, these Jewish men and women that they just discovered in Gaza. The idea of child sacrifice, of people allowing their children and wanting the children to die for a higher cause, is nothing new. It goes back, we know, the earliest that we know of is the days of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu dealt with Avodah Zarah. His main mission when he was alive, he did not have a Torah. So what was he doing? What was he preaching? We know that Avraham Avinu, says the Rambam, in the laws of idol worship, in his introduction, he tells us that Avraham Avinu spent his entire life, together with his wife Sarah, traveling from city, town to town, teaching and writing about one thing, that there's a God, and God does not want you to kill your children. Does not want that. God doesn't want you to die for him, he wants you to live for him. Because most of the people who were worshipping idols in the days of Avraham Avinu were killing their kids. It didn't stop in the days of Avraham Avinu. It continued. By the way, the very famous question is, then the 10th test of Avraham Avinu was Akedat Yitzchak, to bring his child Yitzchak, the only child he had through his wife Sarah, as a potential sacrifice. Well, if you read through the end of the story, you realize that he was willing to do it, although it went against every fiber of his being, but in the end, God stopped it. How do you teach people not to do things? Well, there's a couple of ways. One, you can talk about it and say, don't do something. The other is to give a display and say, this is what we don't do. So from the days of Avraham Avinu, when Avodah Zarah, idol worship, was rife, it was everywhere, until the modern day, we're going to talk about in a minute, we've been dealing with this challenge. The parasha of Shoftim talks about a very abhorrent form of the same disease. We know that the Ammonites, the Ammonim, they had this idol they used to worship called Molech. Molech was this idol. And this idol was a hollow idol made of brass, large brass receptacle, and it was divided into 7 compartments, the rabbis tell us, and they would put various creatures into each one as a form of sacrifice. In one, it could be a bird, a goat, a lamb, a calf, a cow, an ox, and in the last one, it was hard to believe, they would actually put a child. When I was in Mexico for Pesach, I work on a program as a rabbi in Mexico for Pesach, and I wanted to go to a certain place called Tulum. Tulum is a Mayan area, they say, from antiquity. So we went there, and we had a tour guide who was taking us around. And I was there with my wife and my kids. I had to drag the kids a little bit. I found it absolutely fascinating to see the Mayan ruins and stuff. While we're walking around, they showed us various houses that still exist from those days, and the image of a descending god on the outside of a lot of these houses. They say this was the god that they worshipped, and he said that the Mayans and many others had a custom to kill a member of their people as a sacrifice to God, and according to him, they were, dare I say it, breeded as future sacrifices to their God in order to make peace, in order to start the rain, or whatever they needed in those days. So I said to the tour guide, he's a very, very nice guy, I said, wow, that's terrible. They're killing members of their own family to, start the rain. That's a terrible thing. And he looked at me and said, no, it wasn't terrible. This was part of their culture. This is part of their whole way of being, and this is how they worship their God. I said, yeah, but that's not good. Killing people for God, voluntarily, is not a good thing. And he couldn't understand. He's like, yeah, but why not? This is what they did, right? And we have to respect that, right? That was the way of doing it. So people look at Avraham Avinu as someone who's like, very, very permissive. It's all good. Opening his tent to everyone, like we always speak about, which I speak about, and welcome people into his tent and feeding them and teaching them about one God. You should know that he was actually pretty strict. And he spent a lot of his time telling people this is wrong. He was unequivocal about this. That's what he was mostly doing, telling people that killing their children was wrong. And it's continued. And basically what they used to do is they used to heat up this brass structure, and in order for the cries of the child, they would play music as well at the same time, so it would drown out the crying of the animals and this child. This disease of child sacrifice has continued to this very day. There are people who are alive today that we know about, unfortunately, who still believe this is what God wants. And they're still willing to send their children, whether their children are young or their children in their 20s or 30s, and say, go blow yourself up, go kill Jews, go kill people who are not from... Kill yourself in order to ingratiate yourself, in order to get to heaven. This is antithetical. This is the complete opposite of Torah belief. There is nothing worse than this. Giving your life up in such a way voluntarily. Look, the Torah parasha also speaks about going to war. But even there, we don't want to die. We want to defend our country. We want to protect our borders. We have to sometimes preemptively do that. And Rahman al-San, in war, in Melchama, people die. But to just come along and to sacrifice yourself and say, this is what God wants, and to commit suicide is a terrible avla. This is very, very, very problematic. And Avraham Avinu taught it on the future site of the Beit HaMikdash, as if to say, these two things do not go together. Okay, with that said, so we have some idea of how sinful it is to do such actions. Let's talk a little bit about war in general, because war does appear in the parasha.